Hello everyone, Angela here. I'm on vacation today, so the background's a little different, that's why. And if I look a little tired, that's why, because I'm getting lots of rest. So it was an early morning today, so I am so excited to continue with Deborah. As I was going through and reviewing my notes from last week when we talked about her profile. So if you haven't watched that video, go watch that. And we talked about how, what characteristics. So she's a wife, a prophetess. She held court under a palm tree, the palm tree of Deborah. I don't know about you, but I found some interesting things to look deeper into this week. So I looked up the river Kishon, and there was a couple of battles that happened at that same location. So notable battles that was where Saul met the Philistines. So David and Goliath battle was there. Elijah, when all the false prophets were the prophets of Baal, when he drove them all down into the valley and slaughtered them all, that was the valley right there, the valley of Kishon, at the river of Kishon. So this valley was, most of the Israelites lived up in like the hills. So if you think of this region, you have the Sea of Galilee over here and Nazareth, and where all the action takes place when Jesus comes, right? And then over here you have the Mediterranean Sea, and then the river flows between those two. And that's the valley. Well, the Israelites lived up in this region in the hills and the forest. So there are also battles that talk about it happened in the forest of Ephraim, and that's the hills where the Israelites live. So whenever they went into battle, they would leave the hills and go down into this valley. Well, this valley, when they drove people into the valley, this particular instance, a flash flood came. So something happened, whether, if you're not familiar with flash floods, I'm literally in Arizona right now, so I learned a little about flash floods living in Arizona. And if you live in the desert, flash floods happen. It could not even be raining right now, but if you're in a valley or a gorge or by a river, that's maybe just a trickle, and down the road somewhere there's a body of water or the mouth of the river, and it starts raining, even if it's far away and where you are it's like a crystal clear day and there's no rain in sight and it's raining somewhere else, that river can swell quickly. And if you're in a place where you can't get away, or you're in a heavy chariot, and all of a sudden the water comes and it wipes away your chariots, or you get stuck in the mud now because there's instant mud and muck and clay, which is in that region. Your chariot gets stuck, and now all of a sudden, where you had the upper hand in the war, in the battle with all these other people on foot with bows and arrows, now all of a sudden you're stuck, and you are a stuck object that it can be an easy target. So that is what happened in this battle. So all of a sudden they drive them in, and God said, drive them into the river. So they drove them in towards the river, and the river swelled. There was a flash flood. All of the chariots got stuck. And of course the Israelites won the battle because it was easy pickings basically. So that, I looked up that, and again, I went to my Bible app and I did a search under Kishon. I looked under the word Kishon. I looked under the valley Kishon. I looked under river of Kishon. I even just looked up the word valley just to see if maybe sometimes it's called a different name. And I was going to cross-reference, and I didn't get that far. I was going to cross-reference to see if this is actually the valley of death, because there is a valley, and I didn't remember the name, that as we were going through we did a study about Jesus personality. So if you were in my previous group, we did a Jesus personality study, and the valley there's a brook, there's a valley, and there's a river. And when he takes the disciples down into that valley, they talk about a brook, and I didn't look that up to see what brook that is, but where they are, it's called the Valley of Death because it's the valley where all the battles were, where all the kings were buried, and all, like, they would just have the battle and leave everything there in ruins. So after years and years and years of battle, it just was a stench of a graveyard, and it just was death. It reeked of death. This story we're in is so far back before Jesus that it is quite possible that this battle was the first battle in that valley, which excites me. So I'm going to do some more research this month, and if I will let you know what I find. And it may be the same valley, it may not be the same valley, but you never know. So the other things I found out is she was the first female prophet. So at this point, there was only like 2 or 3 prophets before her, and they were men. And since then, I believe she's the only woman who was ever a judge and the only woman who was a prophet. Now, back then, today, we are fortunate enough that Jesus has come and we have been granted the Holy Spirit, and we can talk to God directly and Jesus directly, and we can hear from him directly. And maybe that hasn't happened to you. It's happened to me, and it's startling when it happens. But back then, that wasn't the case. You had to go to the prophet and hear from the prophet of what God said. And if there wasn't a prophet at the time, then it was silent and nobody heard from God. So you're just like, you have ancient orders that have been passed down that, well, God said to do X, Y, Z, right? And if nobody is hearing from God and no one is there to refer to say, hey, what does God say about this? What does God say about that? Then it gets handed down through the generations, and people just don't take it as very important anymore. Like in today's world, think of the things that have been handed down through your family that you're like, pretty soon it just becomes like, oh, well, did that really happen? It's a good story in our family, but is it true, right? If there isn't someone to say, I was there when that happened. I remember when I was pregnant with my first child, my great grandma was turning 100, and I literally would go visit her every day, and she would tell me stories about the railroad coming across and what life was like, and not having washing machines and not having playpens for your babies, and working the field and literally having a baby. Like, oh gosh, I think I'm going to have a baby. Like, we would be like, oh, I think I need to go to the bathroom. I mean, it was like real life. And I'd read the history books, and I'd read stories, and I'd heard people talk about how things were back then. But to have a real person in front of you saying, I was there, this is what life was like, we had no bathrooms, you know, this is how women were back then, and we didn't have a voice. And you know, the stories I could tell you about some of her daughters and what they went through to try and just make it in the world, and just dealt with things because they had no rights and they had no voice, and they had more rights and voice than the women that we're talking about here in the Bible. So there's something to be said about having a source, right? So she was that source, and she was a woman, and women had no voice back then. So for her to even admit that she heard from God, people probably thought she was crazy. First of all, when she very first said, I think God's talking to me. Can you imagine? Oh, woman, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, I would just imagine that's the conversations between her and her husband, because remember, she's married. It doesn't say, you know, how long had God been talking to her? Just since she was an adult, when she was a teenager, like how long had she had this gift? And how long had people known this? When did she finally reveal it, right? It doesn't say that. It just says there was a time where there was war, and then all of a sudden Deborah rose up and she was a judge. So it doesn't tell us fill in the gaps, right? If anyone has knowledge of that, please share, because that will make our story and our journey even more rich, knowing that. Some other things I wrote down about Deborah is she was an unlikely leader because, again, women were not leaders. So the idea of a woman even being asked to accompany a commander into battle is ridiculous at the time. Like he probably said it to her thinking, well, she's not going to go. She's a woman. Like women don't belong in battle, right? I remember not until recently, even in my own generation, that it was unheard of for women to just enlist in the military. I mean, people did, but it wasn't as commonplace as it is now. And it's like, how do you be in the military? What if you have kids at home, and there's things that are attached to being a woman that men don't deal with. And well, how do you deal with that, being a woman and being in combat? And right. So back in Deborah's day, nobody took a woman into battle, and they especially didn't have her lead the battle. So she was really blazing some trails, and God used her in some amazing ways. I like to cross-reference books of authors that I enjoy. And so John Maxwell has a couple of small books, which are easy to read. This one is called Learning from the Giants, Life and Leadership Lessons from the Bible. And there's a chapter on Deborah in here. And so John calls this chapter Deborah, God specializes in the unexpected. So she was an unexpected leader, right? God's always doing unexpected things, because then it's only God doing it, right? It's not us. It's not a person. Deborah didn't just wake up one day and be like, you know what? I'm going to lead everybody, and I'm going to be the decision maker, and you're going to come to me for everything, and this is the way it's going to be. No. In fact, probably if she did that, or any other woman tried to do that in her time, she would have been killed. So no, she did not just get up one morning and decide that she's going to be in charge. She didn't wake up with aspirations of being a leader. She was placed there. She was chosen by God. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall back then to see how this all happened. But you don't get that part of the story. We just get to hear how she carried out her mission. So some highlights in John's book is she was an unexpected leader at a time when women had few rights and the rulers, warriors, and decision makers of the world were men. Deborah was the judge of Israel. She held court, and Israelites from all over the country came to see her so she could settle disputes, much as the children of Israel had sought out Moses when they were in the desert. But she was more than a judge. She was a prophet, unlike all other judges of the Old Testament. Most of the other judges were warriors, which is how they got their place. And when God spoke to them, he did so through angels. But God delivered his messages directly to Deborah, which was very uncommon. So the other judges weren't prophets. They were just judges because they were strong and mighty, and they were the leaders. So people came to them, that you're the leader, tell me what we should do. She was the leader because God came to her and spoke to her directly. So they could get answers directly from God. Number 2, she delivered an unexpected message. After 20 years of oppression, she received a message that he wanted to help them, and God was very specific of who should command, how they should go into battle, and where the battle would be. So completely God ordained, and he brought that flash flood to disable all of the other army and allow Israel to have a victory. Number 3, God intervened in an unexpected way. Again, the flash flood. Number 4, the result was an unexpected victory. So to the people who finally believed in God and obeyed him, because they had turned away from him yet again, right? Because no one had been speaking for him. Nobody could talk to him. So they were like, you know what? I think we should just go to a different way of doing things, or do whatever we want, because no one's around to tell us any different, right? I read too, so that's a great book. I read too in my studies when I looked up the river and the valley, that all of the other people who lived in that area who were not Israelites, they referred to God as the God of the hills. Because remember back then, everything had a God. You had a God of the water, the God of the air, the God of the whatever, right? It wasn't just one God. There were many gods, according to the people. So, but Israel had one God, and they lived in the hills. So all the other people referred to him as the God of the hills. So when I forget the name of the other people, but when they started calling God the God of the hills, is when he told them to go down into the valley to have the battle, because then he became the God of the hills and the valleys. He's like, I am God everywhere. So you know what? We're going to fight somewhere else so that you can see that I rule everywhere, not just the hills. I don't just live in the hills. I live everywhere. So that was why they fought in the valley. And there's a song, and I will post that on our song list. So don't forget, there is a playlist we're adding songs to. Is you come across things that you're like, oh, there's a song for that. Add it to the playlist. We're creating a Deborah playlist, so we can download some Deborah power whenever we need to. And we're creating a scripture list. Any scriptures also that are just reinforcement, empower you this month, make you feel like you can take on an army if you need to. Deborah was a unique individual, and she just was the first woman to do many things back in a time when women didn't do things. And that's a big movement right now too, is women are really looking to push to that next level of, okay, now we're allowed to have all the jobs men have, and but we still aren't quite getting the same respect that we should get with those jobs that men have, or with the roles that men have. And so that's been a big topic of conversation here in our own time lately. So my question to you would be, what is going on in your life that maybe you're the first, or you're blazing a trail, and maybe even just the first in your family? What does your unique perspective as a woman, what issues are you dealing with that? And how can we help you, get you some tools? Next week, we're going to have a closed session. So if you want to join that, then there's you have to register for that one. If you're one of the testing group, I will send you the link. You don't have to register, and you can join us live. It will not be recorded. So if you don't show up, you don't have it. But we're going to be talking about firsts. What have you been the first of? What are you trying to do differently? What obstacles are you facing? What does being a woman, how does that filter affect what you're trying to do? And is it true, or is it just something that we have been placed upon us as being a woman? That's a struggle. We are going to talk in our week 2 is always going to be about struggles and relationships. So as you're doing your studying, think about struggles and relationships. There's 4 main struggles and relationships that we go through, and then any good story you read has. So 4. So the first struggle you may have is with God. Are you struggling with God over something that he's asked you to do? Maybe he's asked you to do something and you're like, oh, there's no way I can do that. You called the wrong person. I've had moments in my life where it's like, really? I think you meant to call someone else, because I think you have a different Angela, not me. 2 could be self. Are you struggling with yourself? What are you holding yourself back from that you are supposed to be doing? You know you're supposed to be doing it, but your self-doubt maybe, or you're putting high expectation on yourself, or some way you are holding yourself back. Number 3 would be man, a struggle with man or struggle with a person, right? Are there people in your life that you're struggling with that maybe they don't believe in you, maybe they're putting some doubt into you, maybe they're sabotaging you? Real or imagined. People is a struggle. The world is a struggle. Are you trying to do something that the world either is opposed to or is saying you're unable to do, or is it something that the world, the culture isn't ready for, or says that a woman can't do it, maybe? So where is your struggle this month? Deborah had some struggles. She was a woman, so her struggle with God could have been, really? I'm a woman. Do you really think they're going to listen to a woman? Really? That could have been her struggle. With herself, maybe every day before she went out to that palm tree, maybe she was like, I know God told me to go sit under the palm tree, but one of these days someone's going to drag me out and stone me for doing this, right? She could have had that fear within herself of like, what? Can I call the army captain and command him to do something? What? He has an army behind him. Seriously, he's not going to listen to me, right? Who do you think you are? You do that. Who do you think you are to think you can do that? Well, God told you to do it. Well, yeah, but I don't know, maybe I heard wrong. Maybe I need to go back and think about that. Maybe he said to tell your husband to go do that, right? And her struggle with man, she had Barak wouldn't listen to her. He said, I'm not going to go unless you go, right? And she had a choice to make. She could have said, oh, all right, well, I guess if you don't want to go, I guess God will find another way. No, she's like, fine, I'll go with you, right? So she had struggles there. She probably had struggles with her husband, who was trying to be the leader of the household, and she's the leader of everybody. And that's got to be a struggle. When I was in management for the first time, and I'm at work and I'm like, leading the troops, and come home and have to like take off that leadership cap and let my husband be the leader is like a little transition. Some days it didn't work. Some days I couldn't let go of that leadership, and I ran over my poor husband, who was trying to be loving and caring and do things. And so that could be a struggle for her. In the world, she was a woman doing things that women didn't do. Women just didn't do them. Like crazy, right? So she had many struggles. You could identify all 4 struggles through Deborah. So what's going on with you? How can you learn from Deborah to trust God and do what you're supposed to do, even when others say it's not possible or not acceptable? So that is our focus for this week. And comment in the group, and we will put some tools together that can help you to push through. And we will discuss that in our closed call next week. So have a great week, everyone. Blessings to you all. And I will chat with you soon. Have a great day.